This image came to mind today. The White House undergoing a massive renovation in 1948.
Now, with a former real estate developer in the executive mansion, another teardown is underway in Washington and beyond, shaking the government as we've known it to its foundations.
Since the inauguration, President Trump has offered buyouts to 2 million federal workers, fired 16 inspectors general, and got rid of Justice Department officials who investigated him.
And he gave billionaire businessman Elon Musk free rein to weed out what they see as waste and fraud. That included shutting down USAID, the agency that provides humanitarian aid overseas. Critics say what's being lost in this government makeover is oversight and expertise.
Margaret Brennan in Washington now. So, Margaret, where does it seem they're going with all of this?
Well, overnight, nearly all of the 10,000 USAID employees who work to feed the world, combat disease, and respond to disasters, they learned they'll be put on leave as of midnight on Friday. And while the first target is foreign aid, it makes up a very small fraction of the federal budget, less than 1%. But it may be a test case for what is coming to other parts of the federal government.
Let them work!
Let us work, they shouted.
Let us work!
USAID personnel have been locked out of their offices and emails since Monday, leaving many confused as to whether they'll even have health care or paychecks coming. We spoke with one of those individuals who has spent the past decade at USAID.
Why in our conversation do you think you need to remain anonymous?
Everyone is really scared. First, we were scared for our jobs. Then we were scared for the safety of our programs. I have a family like most Americans, and I want to be brave, and I just don't want to put them at any more risk than I have to.
Elon Musk posted on X, USAID is a criminal organization, time for it to die. What did you think when you heard that?
He said that. He said we were vipers. He said that we were worms and not a bad apple, but just worms. He said that we are evil lunatics.
In recent days, the Trump-appointed chief of staff resigned, and the two heads of security put on leave after they refused to let DOGE-linked staffers access classified information.
Are you still officially employed by the U.S. government?
I do not know what my status is. Part of that is that what's been happening has been moving with incredible speed and also an incredible level of sloppiness.
The Trump administration argues the cuts will increase efficiency.
Not only have we abandoned our colleagues, which is an absolute moral atrocity, but we have abandoned our partners in the world. If you've ever seen those photos of people delivering bags of food or wearing the USAID vests or delivering medicines or the big trucks coming in with aid, it's got big USAID logos on it, right? It's got American for a reason. It's got American flags on it. It shows people this is the U.S. coming to your aid.
Margaret, these cuts across the executive branch, to many people it sounds like what Donald Trump promised, and now he's making good on that promise. But it's not about cuts, right? It's about the kinds of cuts.
Right. It's not what you're doing, it's how you do it. Efficiency, no one's going to argue against. But, John, it's hard to put a price on expertise and experience. And as skilled workers are either fired or take buyouts, that impacts the government's ability to respond to crises. That applies to buyouts over at the CIA, where it takes years to develop analysts and agents before sending them into the field, or when it comes to these development workers who go overseas to stem a TB or Ebola or polio outbreak before it gets to American shores. It impacts America's soft power ability to gain influence, not through force. And it leaves a vacuum for China, which is America's chief adversary, to potentially fill that void.
So, Margaret, when you say this could be a test case for other agencies, other larger agencies, how might that play out?
Well, you know, Maurice, one of the things that stands out here is the ripple effect, not just in terms of recipients of aid abroad who, can't get their antiviral AIDS treatments, but here in the United States, a CEO of one of the aid groups told me that between 10 to 50,000 American jobs are expected to be cut across the U.S. in the coming weeks. Not government jobs, private sector jobs, as organizations go bankrupt. And keep in mind, the humanitarian world is not the only industry that is reliant on U.S. government spending.
CBS News has learned that President Trump is pausing all immigration applications filed by migrants from Ukraine and Latin America. The Department of Homeland Security told immigration reporter Camila Montoya Galvez that further vetting is needed.
And with cases already backed up, the president has fired 20 immigration judges. Jason Allen looks at the impact tonight.
Can we call you? We can't call you judge.
I don't think so. Not anymore. Ex-judge, I guess.
You're fully expecting.
I'm just full of Carrie.
Carrie Doyle was expecting to become one of the country's next immigration judges, but she was fired the week before she was supposed to start hearing cases.
There are millions of these cases.
3.7
which is a
million.
big reason why you thought maybe I won't disappear.
Yes,
in all
exactly.
This.
Yeah, that was the thought. That was the hope.
Inside this unmarked building in a Boston suburb, Doyle would have heard cases for asylum, permanent residence, and removal, up to 700 a year.
So you just see people every day, all day, with these life and death decisions over whether they can remain in the United States or not, and then neutrally applying the law.
In Boston and other cities, those cases stacked up as southern border crossings surged. And while crossings have come down, the case numbers, Doyle said, will keep adding up. There are about 4 million outstanding cases right now.
Don't forget that cases come into the system not just from the border, but from the existing people that are in the United States. So as you ramp up removal, they're getting put in front of the immigration judge. So that caseload will balloon.
We asked the Department of Justice why Doyle and other judges were terminated. A spokesperson declined to comment on personnel matters.
And yet, you expected this, in some sense.
I did, just because, we were sort of the last group coming in under the Biden administration.
Doyle had been an outspoken critic of the immigration system when she was an immigration attorney. It landed her on a conservative-backed group's watch list of political appointees.
I took an oath to uphold the Constitution and to do my job. I'm not there to be an advocate. That's what I used to do when I, was with the client in the courtroom. Now I'm the decision maker, and you need to listen to both sides, and you need to weigh the case under the law and then act fairly to make decisions.
And Jason Allen joins us now. Jason, there's this backlog. So what is this going to do to the existing backlog of cases?
Well, it would take a lot to remove those, right? It takes a lot to become one of these judges. You'd have to have a law degree, 7 years of experience, right, to do this. The application process is long. It takes more than a year to get some of these judges into place. And there are some studies showing that we need as many as 300 new judges just to begin cutting into the backlog. That's a lot.
Quite a backlog. So how does this influence the judges who are already on the job, Jason?
That's interesting. I talked to the president of the union that represents these judges, and he's talked to some of them that are still in their seats right now. And he described it as some of them on pins and needles, wondering if they could be next. He also talked about a potential chilling effect because it opens the door to judges questioning their own decision making, wondering if their job could be at stake, and also a chilling effect in any others who might want to join the profession.
And quickly, Jason, are any of these cases going to go away because Trump wants to deport?
No, he has expanded the criteria for expedited removal. That makes it easier to move some people out who have been here less than 2 years. But anybody who's been here more than 2 years still has constitutional protections. There are international obligations as well. They have to have a hearing so that they can make the case that they belong here.
President Trump today began the second month of his second term as head of the U.S. government, a government he is determined to shrink.
And he got some help today from a federal judge in Washington. The judge, an Obama appointee, refused to stop the president's mass firings of federal employees.
The judge said unions representing those workers must take their claims of wrongful firings to the Federal Labor Relations Authority. The chairwoman of that agency, a Biden appointee, is one of the people Mr. Trump fired.
Since the president was sworn in, he has taken aim at the federal workforce of 2.4 million and fired, laid off, or offered buyouts to untold thousands. And we say untold because the White House is not telling us exactly how many as the job cuts continue. But Weijia Jiang has been tracking down the jobs being eliminated. And Weijia, what have you found?
Well, we found that there is a group of more than 500,000 workers vulnerable to the administration's sweeping layoffs, and many serving key positions across the federal government. For some who have already lost their jobs, they're now desperately looking for answers why.
I'm really not sure
what I'm going to do.
Katie Sandlin is still living out of boxes after uprooting her life in Carbon Hill, Alabama last month, a town of 2,000, to work at the National Institutes of Health outside Washington, D.C.
I wiped out my savings account. I maxed out my credit card. I had to take out a loan.
But she called her job an opportunity of a lifetime, educating communities about NIH research.
People like me, where I'm from, rural Alabama, like these kind of jobs don't happen to people like me.
3 weeks later, Sandlin became one of thousands of federal probationary workers to be fired. They had less than 1, or in some cases, less than 2 years of experience, and fewer protections from layoffs, making them easier to terminate.
Now I'm unemployed, I have a ton of debt, and I'm also losing my health insurance.
Did it ever cross your mind that you could be fired in a second?
That part actually never crossed my mind.
Did your supervisor give you a reason for why you were getting fired?
They made it clear that I was not being terminated because of anything that I had done.
An HHS official sent Sandlin a letter saying your performance has not been adequate to justify further employment at the agency.
When I got it, it really upset me because it felt like it wasn't truthful. My boss, her boss, and even his boss all said that that was not true.
Our CBS News data team found that at the Veterans Health Administration, which implements the health care program for vets, probationary workers account for 30% of the staff. At the Department of Agriculture, it's 19% of the branch that performs food safety inspections. When it comes to air safety, about 1/3 of the TSA may be impacted. So far, 2,000 probationary workers at NIH have lost their jobs.
What does the public stand to lose with these widespread layoffs?
We are important and we do important work. We're impactful. And if you have questions or concerns about federal workers, ask one.
Weijia joins us now from the White House. Weijia, what does Katie do now?
Well, she says she can't afford to move back to Alabama after shelling out so much money to move here to the D.C. area. So she's focused on looking for a new job. But she points out how daunting that is, considering there are now thousands of federal workers in the same boat who are competing for those positions.
And Weijia, you showed us how many probationary workers are potentially vulnerable. Do we have any sense of any of them ending up like Katie, like how many that could amount to?
Well, just because they are probationary workers does not mean they will automatically be fired. In fact, depending on the agency, some are considered critical, and so they have exemptions. And remember, they can only be fired for poor performance or misconduct. In Katie's case, she says it was neither. So, John, that lawsuit you mentioned is just one of several, including class action lawsuits in the works.
The cuts keep coming. Now, President Trump is eliminating more than 6,700 jobs at the Internal Revenue Service, the agency that collects 96% of the money that funds the federal government.
And he's doing this at the height of tax season, when Americans are checking their mailboxes for the W-2s and 1099s they need to fill out their 1040s.
And here's another number for you, 800-829-1040. That is the number many taxpayers will be calling to reach the IRS for help, and hoping they'll reach an experienced agent to answer their questions.
Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes looks tonight at the impact of the IRS cuts on the workers and on Americans who depend on them. Nancy?
John, the cuts this week amount to about 6 to 8% of the IRS workforce, and sources tell us they don't believe these cuts are over yet. It's a sharp reversal for an agency that spent the past 2 years aggressively trying to boost staffing to become more responsive to taxpayers.
I always knew I wanted to work for the IRS. This was my dream job.
Today was day one of Elizabeth Caron's job search. The 22-year-old from New Orleans was let go yesterday after just 6 months at the IRS, where she worked as an auditor on high-income tax returns.
We were already really needing more employees to handle the cases that we already had.
CBS News obtained an email that was sent to IRS workers this week. It said those being fired were newer probationary employees who were not deemed as critical to filing season.
What do we know about the people who are being let go?
I'm hearing that it is across all functions. So it includes people who provide taxpayer services and answers the phones.
Lily Batchelder is a tax policy expert and served as an assistant Treasury secretary under President Biden.
I just don't see how, when you suddenly fire thousands of employees in the middle of the filing season, that is not going to put the filing season at risk.
Administration officials say in any operation that is in debt, you would look to cut costs and lay off workers. Why isn't that a valid approach in this case?
Well, first of all, the IRS actually brings in revenue. So for every dollar that you invest in the IRS, it reduces budget deficits by $6.
Kevin Hassett, one of President Trump's top economic advisors, told reporters at the White House that all the federal job cuts will make agencies more efficient.
Nobody's going to the buildings. People aren't commuting because nobody's doing their job.
So you're saying that everybody who's being let go was doing a bad job?
I'm saying that we're studying every agency and deciding who to let go and why. And we're doing so very rationally with a lot of support from analysis.
I asked him about the many fired workers who, like Carone, say they have no record of poor performance.
Yeah, I've never seen a person who was laid off for poor performance say that they were performing poorly.
Those statements are honestly an insult to me. Absolutely. Like I'm getting choked up thinking about that because that's offensive to me.
So Nancy, here we are in tax season. What kind of impact do we expect these cuts to have on the taxpayers?
Well, in the short term, Maurice, we'll probably see fewer audits of wealthy individuals and small businesses. Those audits bring in a lot of revenue. You could also start to see wait times to get someone on the phone begin to inch back up. They had come down pretty precipitously since 2022 when Congress passed $80 billion in additional funds to help the IRS modernize and hire more workers. Those are the very new workers who are now being shown the door.